Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Powers in Play, our monthly program dealing with global and not only regional issues. And first, an editorial note. We are neither predicting nor endorsing. We are trying to analyze the situation, especially in the coming delicate subjects. So, both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have ended their nominating conventions. We are into the final stretch of the presidential as well as the congressional election season. And the question from the Israeli perspective is, what should we expect in either a Harris victory or a Trump win? Or in other words, continuity and change. What will be the mixture? Will we see some isolationism, some internationalism? What should the Middle East and especially Israel expect come next January 20th? With us are retired Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, formerly with the Israeli Military Intelligence Directorate and the National Security Staff. Welcome, Eran.
Good to be here.
Ambassador and former Deputy Foreign Minister Danny Ayalon, earlier the ambassador in Washington and then a member of Knesset and a high official in the Foreign Ministry. Danny, welcome.
Good to see you.
Dr. Uzi Arad, formerly the head of the National Security Staff, the political advisor to the Prime Minister, and a Mossad division chief, Dr. Arad.
Good,
thank you.
Here.
And Reserve Brigadier General Yaron Rosen, formerly of the Air Force and the head of the cyber staff for the entire Israeli Defense Forces. Welcome, General.
Thank you.
Uzi, please go ahead. What do you expect? Without saying right now, it would be premature and the tape can be played against you on November the 6th. So there's no reason to bet on the eventual winner. But in either case, what should Israel expect now that it is still involved in a war and there are, of course, dangers all around? What should Israel expect from the United States in 2025?
I think it would be in Israel's interest that the United States does adopt a policy of being present on the global scene, exerting its influence, extending its security commitments, and playing the constructive role that it did in establishing a U.S.-led, essentially, security environment worldwide, and in the process, of course, position itself effectively against those who are clearly alien to either America, its position, its ideology, and of course these are clearly the forces that we are now facing, specifically Iran, to some extent Russia, and to some extent China. All these are adversaries of the United States, and the United States should be able to confront them effectively, and since in so many ways we are in that camp.
Danny, as a veteran of the Israeli embassy in Washington, does Israel still have, because it used to, leverage over the American political system, either directly through its various officials or through some Jewish American organizations? Or is it only a relic of the past and the Israeli so-called lobby has been bypassed by events and by some counterweights, such as the relatively new pro-Palestinian phenomenon of both demonstrations and voters in swing states?
Well, Amir, there's no doubt that Israel's influence, either directly or through other bodies, Jewish mostly, but not only, Christians as well, is diminished for many reasons. Also, we are not the only player on the in the yard, because as you mentioned, the Muslims also are coming to age, if you may say so, in the American politics scenes, and they are also becoming much more evident, much more vociferous, and they're trying to make their point across and to sway also the politics. However, Israel still has quite a lot of influence for various reasons. First and foremost is the American Jewish lobby. And here we talk not only about votes. Let's say the votes, the American Jewish votes and the Muslim votes are about equal, 6 million each in total, which means about 3 million votes for
Not
each.
only Muslim, there are Arab Christians.
And Arab Christians, right. The Jewish, I would say, influence also, unlike the Muslims, they have a lot of money that can still sway politics over there and intentions. So at the end of the day, I would say that Israel still does have some influence. And then this is the politics of the things, but there is also a strategic issue. The United States still needs Israel for various reasons. We can discuss it later. So I would say no matter who will sit in the Oval Office in the next term, they will continue to support Israel because Israel guards American interest here and worldwide.
But you personally used to sit not in the Oval Office, but in a regular office on 3514 International Drive, right, not far from the Saudi Embassy and the University of the District of Columbia.
And across the Chinese.
Across from the Chinese. And we won't mention, although I am mentioning now, that this is a place where Jonathan Pollard came to. However, it seems as if the Washington Embassy, which used to be the premier post for the Israeli Foreign Service, has fallen from grace. Why?
Well, I guess
after you left.
2 reasons. First is the new age of diplomacy, also based on technology and based on the, I would say, very instantaneous connections between leaders. And today there is a red phone, both in the Situation Room in the White House and in the Foreign Ministry, in the Ministry of Defense, so leaders can speak to each other and they bypass all the bureaucratic chain of command.
On video conference.
On video conference, on other, of course, everything is encrypted. So I would say by that, all ambassadors all over the world feel the change of times. And mostly they are relegated to do PR and to do explanations, maybe to try to get some coalition of support for their countries, whether it's within the press, within their economic community, the military, and all that. So I would say that from now on, I don't think that embassies can regain their influence in the past. It was at the high time, maybe on the 18th century, 19th century, but no more.
Eran, we are talking here in this program about the various presidents, not too many possibilities now that the race has gone down to 2 with some minor third parties.
The Bear Cub murderer has
Indeed. But each president has their own priorities, problems, personnel to fill out the various positions. They have many regions in the world to take care of, not only our own. And the question is, can Israel play the United States against Russia or China and come ahead with some great power competition as its added value?
Well, those in Israel who occasionally advocate for Israel to try and play a kind of non-aligned game, a Nasser style in the 1950s, in the fantasy world. Allow me to introduce a painful shorthand, the CRINK. Professor Prince in Britain offered me this very useful shorthand. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. the challengers, have no interest in Israel as an ally. With all due respect to our relatively healthy relationship with China, it does not equal, obviously, the other sets of interests right now. There is no point and no purpose in such a strategy. Beyond that, first of all, Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. 7 million Jews live in North America, more or less. Nobody knows the exact numbers. So the other wing of the Jewish people, the Jewish bird of the future.
It also depends on who's a Jew, but we leave that for another time.
But people who are essentially self-identified as Jews, there's, of course, you know that the Americans cannot ask a person for his religion, but there are ways of assessing these numbers. But basically...
By the way, if you relax a little bit, the question who is a Jew, according to the halacha or not, we're talking about 22 million
maybe,
of
yes.
Jews or Jewish descent in America.
About 15 million eligible for the right of for the law of return. But basically, we need this structures our policy and has structured it from the days of Ben Gurion. Beyond that, the commonality of values, I think, remains fundamental. We are a democracy, and our place is in the free world. I think the term has gained some, certainly after the invasion of Ukraine, the term the free world has gained some currency again. And that's our place.
When Israelis hear the term free, they run towards it.
Beyond that, there's an interesting point. There's one element of continuity in the vortex of change that overcomes Washington. You know, you see all these small trucks with the belongings of the people who worked in the previous administration going back home, and thousands, literally thousands coming in, the U-Hauls on their way in and out. But there's one element of continuity, and that's the military establishment.
We'll get to that when Yaron Rosen has a minute.
I'm sure. But let me say that Israel's ability to reverse what used to be a relationship with the Pentagon, which used to be the most anti-Israeli element in the American internal spectrum, and now is a solid foundation of the relationship. This is a transformative element that will stay with us whether Harris or Trump
which will let us segue into the military with General Rosen, Yaron. Eran has rightly stated that the military is there to stay, at least on the uniformed side of the House. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Brown, who visited Israel recently, was appointed and entered office only in early October of 2023, which means that whoever is elected president, he still has a long time to serve. We, of course, are used to General Eric Michael Kurilla, the commanding general of the Central Command, visiting Israel, sitting in on war room briefings. But there is a difference between the serving officers, the career military, and the Office of the Secretary of Defense, staffed by civilians. It stands to reason that whoever wins, retired General Austin, who has not been very healthy, will not stay on, and someone else will be appointed with, of course, a deputy secretary, undersecretaries, and the like. So do you agree with Eran that the Pentagon is probably going to still be friendly no matter who wins?
I think we need to look at this from two levels. I think the fact that Israel belongs to CENTCOM and is a crucial part today of CENTCOM, thank God it moved from EUCOM to CENTCOM, because I could not imagine the bureaucratic military affairs.
You mentioned at one time that you flew to Turkey in the first deployment, and Turkey being a member of NATO, but an obstinate one, was a difficult client even then.
Yes. I think that on the military level, uniform to uniform for a second, I think the ties are very strong, and I think Israel being part of CENTCOM is crucial, almost in a way like Qatar and the KAOK over there are crucial for CENTCOM's operations.
At Aludaid.
Yeah, Aludaid. So I think the structure, the basic military structures are in favor for continuity of relations, and I think that the officers that normally they work together, they go to NDU together in the United States, Air Force University, whatever, wherever they meet in these years, is a very strong part, and I'm hopeful that it will continue to strengthen these foundations between the military. So mill to mill, I would say that it is a good basis for the continuity. Having said that, we've seen times that things were different. Okay, the administration matters, and what comes from up there matters, and things might change. So I think the challenge in this transition, by the way, it doesn't matter which side, both ways. I think that the challenge of the Israeli government and the high-level military leaders is to actually navigate the very turmoil, times that we are in, and actually continue build, on one hand, the value, the asset value that Israel is for the United States in helping to form and stabilize. As much as it sounds crazy, Israel has a very important part in stabilizing the Middle East, not only destabilizing it, because we're not the destabilizer, it's the crazy, if you will, people, I'll just call it
rogue actors.
Rogue actors. But I think that if we continue and build a long-term strategic plan with the next administration and tie that together to regional stability, which will affect global stability, because as we have spoken numerous times, the stability in the Middle East reflects from the United States point of view on the global scale. Taiwan and China are looking at how the United States is operating in the Middle East. So shaping that will shape the U.S. foreign.
But let's add another element which is going to reinforce Eran Lerman's point about the fantasy of even thinking about shifting from the American orbit into the Russian and or Chinese one, going from software to hardware. You have flown only American airframes, haven't you? Israel, for the last almost 60 years, when France stopped being its major arms supplier, Israel has leaned on the American defense industry and, of course, the defense dollars, the foreign military sales or finance, in order to equip its air force and other arms. So it's not realistic to expect Israel to win itself on American support.
I think that, again, this is part of, Israeli military buildup is embedded almost in the, in the veins and the blood vessels of U.S. industry. Because if you don't sell to Israel all the United States, made in the U.S., Stars and Stripes, Air Force, and many other systems that Israel buys from the U.S. with foreign military support, FMS, it's bad for the U.S. So it's not only bad for Israel. So there's a Gordy tie between Israel, and it's good that it's like that. I always say that of course, Israel would not like to go to the Russian side or to the Chinese side. There's no question about that. So the only global power on this earth, as I know, is the United States. And based on the shared values that we spoke about, that Eran spoke about, I think Israel is choosing the right global power to cling to. And but when you are the mouse on the elephant's ear, you're still the mouse. So we need to weigh our strategies and make sure that we are not a burden, but an asset.
But again, an elephant and a donkey, they are out of the scope of this discussion, the icons of the various parties.
Oh, of course.
Now,
Bipartisan.
Uzi, there were, after the Yom Kippur War of 1973, and throughout the decades, two major initiatives which did not originate in Washington, but rather within this region. The first was the Sadat initiative coming to Jerusalem, but even earlier, secret talks between Sadat's emissaries and Begin's. And then the United States, under President Carter, decided to support it. And then Oslo in 1993, again, not an American initiative. But if you take these two out, Israel has not come up with any diplomatic initiative, and obviously not recently. Israel is not proactive diplomatically, and the former foreign service officer here will excuse my language.
But we'll agree with you.
Okay. Should Israel come next year, rather than wait for others to initiate, come up with some diplomatic initiative and try to sell it to Washington?
Well, obviously, the current situation even calls for greater degree of Israeli activism in this domain, seeking to expand the zone of peace and normalizing relations with all countries. And if it can do so unilaterally or discreetly or its own initiative, maybe that should be exercised. But at the same time, it would serve our interest to do that with agreement with the United States. Remember, there was a time in which we played the rule of no surprises. And that rule should apply in this case. Maybe we want to embark on a certain initiative, but we should not do it by surprising the Americans. It should be, the least we can do is to inform them, and having tacitly their blessing.
But there's a problem here. The United States has a special relationship with Great Britain, and in fact with the entire Five Eyes organization, Australia, New Zealand, Canada too. And if the United States has a policy of no surprises with them, it means that whatever you say to Washington goes to London and the other capitals too, and it leaks. Unless it is being leaked by Jerusalem, which is
That's
another.
the problem. How do you can make a difference between a leak and what people write on their whatever Twitter or something? But still, there is need for coordination, and I think why not? Because at the end of the game, we may need the United States, because it would become possibly a player into the very process that you started at your own initiative. So, by the way, this no surprise, let me add another dimension to the mill-to-mill security relationship, and that's the Intel, which is a parallel channel, but also in the course of time did benefit from high degrees of cooperation to mutual benefit. And that also involved a degree of us being an asset. In fact, that is what we used to boast, that what we brought to the table, certain intelligence capabilities or possibilities that complemented what the United States has had, and we should nurture that as well.
But from time to time, we have heard suspicions from Washington that intelligence is being cooked on the Israeli side in order to help policymakers get what they want from Washington, that it is not raw intelligence polished by assessment.
True. Well, the problem of the politicization of intelligence is an old affliction that might be the case in Israel, but also in the United States, you find instances of this happening. But I'll tell you what is the worst sin. It is not the involvement of politics. It is the militarization of intelligence that often colors things with military institutional things. Be it as it may, I think that the Israel should aspire to be on the level of the Five Eyes. It could have been on that level, unless
It starts with an I.
unless it deliberately loses credibility in the process, and we earn our being isolated from that. But that should not be the direction.
Well, just to remind our viewers, not you, you remember it, you were here when the British mandate ended and the state of Israel was born. It craved some British influence. It remained in the sterling bloc for a few years until it shifted to the dollar. But that was that. Eran, let me ask you regarding what Uzi said about the major, perhaps over influence of the military in intelligence affairs. Who interprets America for Israeli decision makers when the director of military intelligence is the overriding assessor?
Well, you're baiting me because I was the interpreter of America for Israeli governments for a while. I think I can tell you where I fell flat on my nose, but most of the time I think we got it
when
right.
You were in uniform as a colonel,
as a lieutenant colonel, a young lieutenant colonel, but with a sense of what America is all about. I think we got at least 91 quite right. The elections of 92, not as much, but overall, I think increasingly we recognize that there needs to be a specific American table at the National Security Council level, bringing all knowledge about this absolutely vital relationship to the table and on a regular basis feeding the Prime Minister with more than dribs and bits and pieces from different directions. Of course, we currently have a Prime Minister who prides himself for being an American expert, and at his elbow is an American-born Minister of Strategic Affairs who
Ron Dermer,
who also plays a major role in managing the relationship, former ambassador in Washington, the son of a mayor in Florida. But I think there needs to be a regular table. But by the way, since we mentioned the military and mil to mil and intel to intel, cyber is also a major field in which Israel can bring its contribution to bear on American considerations. I'm reminded of a novel written by none else but former President Clinton, in which the President of the United States has to escape Washington under the threat of a major cyber attack. And
he personally took pen to hand? Or was there a ghost somewhere?
He wrote it jointly with a famous Patterson, I think, famous thriller writer. Yeah. But there's clearly the input of the informational input came from Clinton himself. And in that story, the one person the president calls first is the woman Prime Minister of Israel,
who then calls Yaron Rosen, the cyber staff chief of the IDF.
So it's not as if we are bereft of assets to bring to the table. Having said so, I think the long-term strategy of Israel vis-a-vis FMF, as we did with ESF in its day, is gradually
ESF,
the economic support fund that was that paid for our debts in the 80s. We basically rid ourselves of that dependence. And I think a country of $50,000 GDP per capita should also plan over time to rid itself of the financial dependence.
There's never enough money in the budget.
And structure its relationship with the American industries on the basis of joint ventures.
But this sounds like the very
innovation-driven joint ventures.
But Eran, this sounds
but that's a long-term strategy,
like the very
generational
first
strategy.
speech Prime Minister Netanyahu made to Congress in 1996, following in the footsteps of Menachem Begin, who also wanted Israel to stand on its own feet. But eventually, all prime ministers find that it is very, very tough to get the extra $5 billion from internal sources, and they would rather get it from Washington.
It much depends on our future trajectory.
Yes, Uzi.
I must take issue with Eran, who said that we usually got it right when it came to assessing things American.
No, he said that he got it right.
He got it. In fact, when you look at the record, and if you include under the label of given advance warning, the warning function, we've been constantly surprised by American actions. In fact, at critical points, we were completely taken by surprise, which is a failure of providing warning. To give you an example, on major issues which concern Israel, when, for example, Amidor used to say that...
This is Yaakov Amidor, your successor at the National Security Staff.
Used to say that the negotiations between Iran and the United States in Oman came as a total surprise. That's what he said. And then he went on accusing the Americans of deceiving us deliberately, and he used very harsh words. Be it as it may, in the first place, it shouldn't have been a surprise. Come on. We, who are supposed to be knowledgeable about things in Oman, were surprised by this. But if it were a surprise, that's bad enough by itself.
But what are you saying, that Israel should spy on America?
No, I would tell you what it could do, which connects to the role of the ambassador, which you so early buried.
Political reporting.
To give you, for example, the famous ultimatum given to Netanyahu, the not one brick. That was a body blow. No one had predicted or knew.
This is the Obama administration.
Yes, and Netanyahu was shaken. And then you have previous examples, President Bush, the first, when he went on his non-proliferation speech, I think in the spring of 91 or so. So each time, the number of times when America took actions which affected Israeli interests, the matter came as a surprise. So now, ideally, we would like not to be surprised, and it would be nice if America keeps us abreast of those things without us having to spy on them.
But if I may, there are some examples to the contrary. I can tell you that the Bush, George W.,
yes,
and Sharon had very good rapport, and we got an early warning enough to prepare ourselves around the world and
2003.
2003, but also in 2002, when the United States started the attack in Afghanistan. I was there on the line.
Late 2001.
October of 2000. Yes,
No, you were. It was October of 2001.
2001, right?
October the 7th, by the way.
Exactly, and I was on the line, on the red line, when Bush picked up the phone, called Sharon, and he told him we are going to attack Afghanistan in a few hours. And we had time to prepare. But of course,
that should be the rule.
That should be the rule, absolutely. So it also depends on, I would say, the personalities. If you have personalities, like you mentioned, Amidor or even Lerman, during him, there was this big surprise of no brick in the West Bank, then it kind of deteriorates and degrades the relationship.
But here is what I would like to plug into this. If you're not permitted, you're not allowed to spy, then you're left to the only means that can inform you about what to expect. And here, it's been a traditional matter that just before a visit of a leader, it is the ambassador's letter back home who provides as much as he or she can to prepare the coming leader with what to expect. And it is often the ambassador who, thanks to his access to assistance, get the pulse and use his best instincts and provide sufficient guidance without spying. Because that surprise that happened with a body blow was uncalled for. Had we had ambassadors who understood that they have an advantage in being positioned with direct personal access, who in the role of playing their ambassadorial role actually give guidance.
But isn't the problem the other way around, that prime ministers, when they have personal knowledge from their conversations with the president, they do not share it with those in charge of assessment. And therefore, their subordinates cannot give them the right assessment of what to expect.
It will always be like that. I mean, downward, the information is shared only if needed, if the leader thinks he needs it.
But you're accountable for telling him what to expect.
It's hard to be the servant of the leader. That's life. But the thing is, I think that in the day and age of information that we live today,
but I'll tell you what
there's
my
so much
advice
to do.
was.
Hold on.
There's so much communication going on so many levels. It's not like it was, 40 or 50 years ago or 100 years ago when the only channel was the diplomatic channel. You have so many channels now, and even intelligence today. What type of intelligence? Open source intelligence, web intelligence. There's so much going on, and I think it goes back to the relationship and the rapport between leaders. That's the bottom line I take. I mean, you see it on every level. If you see the leaders getting on and having a good communication, the whole system works different. And if it's the other way around, everybody suffers. And even using the word spying, I mean, spying is, between who? Between enemies. And it's just today, it's just one small
Sometimes
force.
it's spouses.
Well, spying is not a good thing to think about when you're talking with your most important ally. And even not talk about it.
Let me tell you what I told the
Briefly, please.
Yeah, I told him that, I told the Prime Minister, if you do not share all information that the intelligence services have and need to know, you will end up by them not sharing with you what you need to know. So don't play that game.
Eran?
Let's all remember that there is another major channel in the American democracy that Israel can utilize, both for influence and for knowledge.
Congress?
Which is Congress. And
Committees.
prime ministers in Israel who focused on the White House, always, and I can think of some famous names, even the former ambassador in Washington, who was totally focused on his relationship with the White House to the
That is Rabin.
detriment of his of the congressional leg. But Pennsylvania Avenue is a two-way street. People in Congress, particularly those who sit in the key committees, are vital for the ability of the administration to carry out its policies and are therefore also knowledgeable and influential. Israel's position in Congress remains quite solid. In fact, it has been solidified in recent weeks with the defeat of two anti-Israeli Democrats within their own districts in the primaries. First, Jamal Bauman in New York, and then Cory Bush. These are signal events, and interestingly enough, AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez
Has moved to the center.
Has distanced herself from the squad to some extent. So basically, there is a mainstream Republicans and Democrats who are still very important interlocutors for Israel.
We here are for affirmative action, and Yaron has not been given his right share of the conversation. So let me address this question to you, even though each of the other three could have easily answered it too. The United States, with its very good relationship with Israel, and as we saw recently, coming to the defense of Israel, but also having as a priority force protection of its own forces in the Middle East, should, for instance, Iran retaliate against American bases rather than against Israel, is in a bind. Should Israel tell it in advance of its plans in the region, in which case the United States will be complicit, will not be able to deny that it at least passively, took part in the Israeli operation, or should the other consideration, for instance, of force protection or other partners, take precedence?
I think it's important to understand that both sides inform each other on a very, very regular basis. When do you inform the other side is, the delicate line. If there's a high risk and a high and immediate risk from whatever you're doing to American forces, it will always go to informing in advance. But if the advance informing in advance has a chance to somehow, for various understandable reasons, operational and intelligence reasons, can hurt the surprise attack. So the American forces are either informed a minute before or a minute after, and I think both sides understand these issues.
General Yaron Rosen, Dr. Uzi Arad, Ambassador Dani Ayalon, and Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, thank you all. This has been Powers in Play. We will be back with another edition on TV7 Israel News next month. For the time being, shalom from Jerusalem.